And yes, thank you very much for coming to this webinar. It's a great pleasure to be able to present. As the title suggests, sort of time for sea change, and I'll give an update on the ongoing stakeholder campaign that the SPR UK is leading on, and yeah, and in a way make a statement really that NICE guidelines really need a revised methodology. So shall I just jump in?
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Okay, sorry, it's my first webinar, so it's an interesting experience. So we have time, as Alex says, we will have time, plenty of time, hopefully, at the end of this presentation. And yeah, if all goes well, we might have 45 minutes or even half an hour or even 45 minutes. And for both questions, but also maybe discussions, because I'd be very interested in what people have to say. So yes, so we have time for that. So let me go straight in and 1 second. And start with a brief, just a brief overview. I don't know in a way of how many of you are sort of familiar with the NICE guidelines procedures. So I'll just give a brief overview of that. Before that, just to sort of set the scene, so it was in July 2017 when the draft guideline or the draft revision of the 2009 guideline for depression in adults was released, and stakeholders were sent the draft to review. And the procedure usually is that all stakeholders have about 6 weeks to review a final draft of the guideline, and can make comments and suggestions, like in the I don't know which way around you're sitting, but on the right, the document on the right shows you how it looks like. So people make comments about the draft guideline. So I registered SPR UK as a stakeholder, and together as 10 SPR members, SPR UK members, we formed a working group and looked at the guideline in great detail. I mean, it's a guideline consisting of thousands of pages. 6 weeks, as you can imagine, was certainly not long enough. But we reviewed the guideline as best as we could and made our comments and submitted them. And I felt, while reviewing it, obviously we talked about it, and the more we sort of reviewed them, the more we were actually shocked by the guideline, and sort of felt, actually we need to do something. We were seriously, we identified serious concerns with these guidelines, which I'll outline in a minute. However, sort of previous experience that people had with NICE was, and also the procedures, very much that you submit your comments, but you don't know if they take these comments into account until the actual document is published. So we didn't feel we could risk that, to sort of gamble whether they would take it into account or not. And once the guideline is published, it's published. So we approached other stakeholders and asked them whether they would also put a statement into their response, saying that we really would like to have a second consultation period. We looked at the manual, and we felt that we had good cause to ask for a second consultation period, given our serious concerns. So some of the stakeholders that we approached did that, and we basically asked for a second consultation period. And this is how it really began, because they didn't respond to, they didn't give us a second consultation period, or responded that they didn't want to do that. So we thought, okay, well, let's start a campaign, and we approached more stakeholders to support us, as well as UK MPs and peers who also supported us. And we fought and campaigned and lobbied quite hard, and in the end did get a second consultation period. So that was a great achievement, and it was good that we did, because during that second consultation period, we noticed that none of the changes that we asked them to make, none of the concerns that we raised were actually taken seriously. So, you know, we were once again shocked that they hadn't, and this time decided, well, if they hadn't made the changes, we would campaign again and sort of say, well, you know, actually this document, if it gets published as it is, cannot be trusted, and we actually want this document to change, and we want it to have a full revision. And that was the second part of our campaigning that went on, you know, the whole of last year. Again, we went to Parliament, we got support by 33 parliamentarians and peers, as well as, you know, approached further stakeholders. And let me just see. Here, I'll go back in a minute. You can see 37, it's now, organisations are supporting, you know, major psychotherapy organisations within the UK, as well as clinical psychologists, GPs, service users, yeah, psychiatrists, doctors. I mean, all of the major mental health organisations have come together, and we have said, well, if this document is not amended, if the changes that we want them to make are not addressed, we won't recognise this draft. It should not be published. So in October last year, we were notified that this new draft guideline would undergo a third revision, and this has never ever happened again. Happened before. No other NICE guideline ever reached that stage, so it was a huge achievement. The reasons why we why we were so concerned with the draft guideline was very much because what we identified, or what we saw when we looked at the draft was, you know, actually when we looked at the draft with a scientific lens, that we found ourselves extremely concerned. So in addition of a lack of transparency and several inconsistency, we detected various serious methodological flaws in how NICE chose to select, chose to group, and chose to analyse the supporting evidence. So it became clear, as I said, that this document, if the document was to be published, it actually would have serious consequences. So it would lead to misleading treatment recommendations, and that would seriously impede the care of millions of people suffering from depression in the UK. And I believe that the sheer scale of depression in the UK, and the fact that NICE has significant influence on UK, but also international policy, treatment services, the health professional workforce, and research practices, you know, the sheer scale of that really dictates that those in charge follow the most robust methodology in the most transparent way, and all of which was not the case in this particular guideline. So we reached out to further stakeholders, as well as sought further support from Parliament. And as I just said, we managed to get a second consultation. We managed to get a third, well, in a sense, a third consultation. So the draft is being reviewed again, and we will have a third chance to review whether the changes have been taken into account or not in October or November this year. So also there was no doubt that this draft guideline met NICE's definition of exceptional circumstances in several areas in order to meet these revisions. It was a hard battle indeed. But it was well worth the fight, because reviewing the draft, as I said, revealed that none of these changes have been taken into account. And once they have agreed to give the review the draft a third time, they have also not really said in the scope what they're going to change. This led us to approach NICE and say and ask them to have another meeting with them. We had one meeting before, and we suggested to have another meeting with them, during which we could discuss the changes that we wanted them to make. That took some time, but you know, with the help, and especially instrumental help by Oliver Letwin, we managed to get a meeting with them that happened about a month ago. And I would say that the meeting was rather constructive, and we really hope now that they have taken our serious concerns into account, and that they will address all of them. So I will talk you through, there's the position statement, which is on our website, the SPR website, and all, you know, if people are from other organizations joining this talk, all of your organizations have the position statement, but they're also on our website, or email me if you would like to have a copy. And the position statement that, you know, that has signatories from all the organizations, as well as several important, you know, many important individuals, summarize the 6 methodological concerns, as well as a couple of wider concerns that we're raising with NICE guidelines in particular. But I will talk you through these 6 methodological concerns and summarize them, you know, as much as I can. And if you have any questions afterwards, do ask. So the 6 methodological concerns relate to, firstly, the proposed categorization or the classification system of depression. And we're arguing that it does not reflect good evidence. No. The second one is their chosen method for determining treatment effects. We're arguing it's inappropriate and discriminatory. The third point is that the chosen measurement points are inadequate and that it does not enable NHS services to deliver parity of esteem. So they do not look at follow-up after treatment has finished. The fourth is the narrow focus on symptom outcome, which does not reflect service user preference. And the fifth is that the statistical choices made, i.e. network meta-analysis, are associated with serious and unique risks. And the last key methodological point is that the evidence on service user experience is not reviewed and is not incorporated, and that really needs to be done. So let me start with proposed categorization. The first methodological flaw concerns the proposed categorization. And as we all know, depression comes in many forms, and the assumption of a homogeneity among patients suffering from depression has been rather unhelpful. So we know in terms of chronicity, severity, and complexity, its presentation varies enormously. So the task of a systematic review team is undoubtedly complex and not an easy endeavor. However, any guideline that operates within the evidence-based medicine paradigm, as indeed NICE is, needs therefore to make blunt categorization. However, the classification system adopted and utilized in this guideline is highly concerning, and if not changed, would be out of line with existing American and European classification systems. So on one hand, it uses the method of dividing the trial populations by dichotomizing baseline severity as more severe and less severe depression. And there's no evidence of the validity of this dichotomy. And the method used to derive at this distinction in itself has not been validated and might thus not reflect a reliable methodology. Furthermore, and that's the last point on the slide, the distinction between treatment-resistant depression and chronic depression, as well as complex depression adopted in this draft, is highly problematic and also out of line with other clinical and research guidance. So again, there's no evidence that actually warrants such a clear distinction between these different groups of depression, if you like. And both the American Psychiatric Association and the European Psychiatric Association recommend a common persistent category, or persistent depression category, with subcategories for severity and degree of associated psychosocial disability. Secondly, the method used to work out whether a trial has found the clinical significant treatment effects are inadequate. So this is of particular importance for persistent, severe and complex forms of depression. So these patients are already severely disadvantaged in terms of research guiding their clinical management. So full remission from a severe baseline is difficult to achieve, whereas partial recovery might be a successful outcome indeed, one might argue. So the guideline review must look at the amount of clinical effect from a severe baseline point and not ignore treatment effect simply because patients do not fully recover by the end of treatment. So for the analysis concerning first episodes of depression, so those they have sort of made a distinction between more severe and less severe depression. So a better or clinical, more useful method really is to look at individual change rather than post, pre and post treatment change, but to look at individual change, for example, using the Jacobson and Truax's reliable change index. It would be clinically more useful, or clinically be a more useful method. Third, NICE focuses on the end of treatment as the main outcome measurement point. So it omits long-term follow-up data, even when it is available, despite the repeated calls of the importance to do so, both within the research, within the research society, but also by NICE and in previous guidelines, really calling for research to carry out trials that have a long-term follow-up. So in this guideline, they're ignoring all that data. And this omission is especially surprising when treatment-resistant depression and chronic depression are considered. NICE does not treat any other long-term condition in this way. So, for example, the guideline on diabetes includes the examination of outcomes ranging from 2 years up to 10 years follow-up. So, indeed reflecting the long-term chronic nature of this condition. The epilepsy guideline and the arthritis guideline, for example, examined evidence including 1 to 2 year follow-up data. So it's really I don't understand, it's not understandable why they haven't included long-term follow-up data for depression, or why they treat depression differently to any other chronic condition, given that we know that depression can become chronic. So in order to meet with the principles of parity esteem, so where mental health is valued equally with physical health, all treatments seem to be effective, all treatments deemed to be effective and recommended for long-term depression ought to have demonstrated an impact at least 1 year, if ideally 2 or more years beyond the end of treatment. Indeed, NICE is rather inconsistent here, as the quote shows on the slide, or emphasizes. As it says, the quote, the aim of interventions is to restore health through the relief of symptoms and restoration of function, and in the longer term to prevent relapse. That's a quote taken from the introduction of the NICE guideline, or the draft NICE guideline. So they refer to its importance to restore health in the long term, to prevent relapse. So in other words, to sort of say that the changes are actually sustained after treatment is finished, but they are not applying it when analyzing the evidence. Fourth, service users often report that the outcomes are most important to them, that the outcomes that are most important to them are actually quality of life, ability to deal with problems, being able to take care of oneself, feeling independent, feeling able to communicate with others, feeling able to get about, ability to attend education, work, or social events. So the utilization of a range of outcome measures needs to be the focus. So only focusing on symptom outcome measures is restrictive and ignores the preference of service users. There's yet another inconsistency in the guideline with regards to that. So it's rather misleading, as the introduction stresses that the importance of treatments needing to improve patients' quality of life and overall functioning. Yet the review of the evidence does not take account of these outcomes and focuses only on symptom change. It's quite interesting because in their response to our suggestion that we made during the official stakeholder consultation, we were told that most studies actually did not include a functioning measure. And it's simply not true. So a published reanalysis of the 2004 NICE guideline by Susan McPherson, Chris Evans, and Phil Richardson was has shown that it was possible, and they revealed that the best treatments were actually not the same as those deemed best from the analysis of symptom outcomes. So eyeballing all studies that NICE included in this update by my research assistants actually revealed that the majority of the studies had a secondary measure on functioning of some sort. So their explanation that these studies did not have other measures was also simply not true, and it is possible to run the analysis with data, or to rerun or run the analysis in parallel with another outcome measure that actually service users would prefer. The fifth concern is with regard to the statistical analysis utilized, so with network meta-analysis. So guidelines have been using this method to analyze the various studies that fit the particular inclusion criteria. The need, in a way, for an adequate method to address the limitations of meta-analyses has been stressed by many researchers, and the utilization of network meta-analysis has gained popularity as it aims to do so. And overall, I think network meta-analysis is a very interesting statistical methodology. So in simple terms, it is a statistical analysis that uses both direct comparison between treatments and predicts outcome of comparisons of treatments that have in reality never been carried out, so-called indirect comparisons. So as the picture shows, it creates a network of comparisons of direct and indirect comparisons across trials based on a common comparator. So in all fairness, the development group, the guideline development group, has a real challenge at hand. So because never ever has there been such a complicated and large data set, including such a variety of treatments, both psychological, physical, and pharmacological. So theoretically, network meta-analysis provides them with a method for using all this data in order to provide a rank ordering of all treatments involved, which is their aim really. So it can provide, it can improve the precision of the direct estimates and allows for the exploration of biases that are difficult to assess in standard meta-analyses. So there are advantages. However, there are unique risks associated with this methodology that need to be addressed. Or in other words, certain preconditions need to be met before such an analysis should be employed and then yield valid outcomes. So having reviewed the guideline to some extent, to a great extent, and indeed some of us have even tried to replicate the analysis and are still working on that, we are arguing that these conditions have not been met, thus rendering the outcomes invalid. So, for example, the main assumption underpinning the validity of network meta-analysis is that there are no important differences between the trials included. These include not only severity at baseline, number of previous episodes, and quality of study, which the draft guideline does indeed try to address, but it also includes sample size, age, sex, socioeconomic factors, therapist factors, as well as treatment dose and administration of treatment. This network meta-analysis includes 351 studies, so comparing 81 interventions and combinations of interventions, which differ considerably in all these variables I've just mentioned. Thus, they violate the transitivity or consistency assumption. Moreover, as Robert Elliott, one of my colleagues, and some of you I'm sure know him very well from SPR, said that NICE in a way utilizes network meta-analysis in a way that the result is a method of such complexity that it becomes opaque to outsiders. So in other words, it makes the assessment of the assumptions and judgments that went into it incredibly difficult. And again, it was interesting to kind of look at NICE's response to our critique after the second consultation. And they sort of said, well, thank you very much for your comment, and I'm quoting them now. Network meta-analysis has been used within NICE guidelines for several years, and the methodology has been widely acknowledged. Network meta-analysis are performed where necessary for guideline review questions. This is described within the guideline manual and NICE technical support units documents. That's all they've said to our response and our detailed analysis and response as to why we feel that actually network meta-analysis should not be used in this very complicated study. Well, complicated, not study, but in this very complicated guideline using so many different studies. It's never been carried out in that way. So their response denies the fact that it is a novel technique and that the jury is still out as to whether this method is appropriate. So such a complicated data analysis has not been replicated enough to make reliable judgments. So NICE ignores the fact that many experts warn against using it as a primary data analysis technique given these various risks. The sixth point is that they have ignored the research of service user experience. So creating sound public policy requires that we draw on a diverse range of evidence. So in that, qualitative evidence maximizes the value of reviews to policy and patient decision-making. So case studies and qualitative evidence actually really should inform the existing guideline as part of a multi-level synthesis, in which qualitative evidence is not merely supplementary, but intrinsic to the generation of the clinically representative picture. There's no evidence that depression is a static biological phenomenon. And again, as I am sure we all agree, the experience of depression is intertwined with the social and economic context in which people live. A lot has happened since 2009 that most certainly has had an effect on people's conceptualization and seeking access and experience of treatment. So for example, the impact of austerity on depression, the changes which impact on the extent to which stigma features in client experience. So for example, the Time to Change campaign, as well as the recent policy changes, which include the CARE Act. There have been numerous primary research studies carried out since 2009 on experiences of depression and its treatment. My colleague Susan McPherson has done a scope of this literature, and she found that 93 studies were published between 2009 and 2011, and all of these have been completely ignored in the draft guideline. And she actually counted the number of participants, and what she found is that actually the number of ignored voices, service user voices, were 2,690. So thus we are arguing that NICE needs to update this section and incorporate the findings into the broader approach to quantitative review and treatment recommendation. And this would have a significant impact, as service users often voice a preference for more rather than less choice, and for longer term rather than shorter term therapies, as alluded to in the 2009 service user experience section already. So if the methodology is not changed, I would argue that the guideline will force a U-turn on the progress made in providing equity of access to a wide range of psychological therapies. It will discriminate against psychological therapies in spite of service users' preference over pharmacological alternatives. And it will also restrict patient choice and shared decision-making stressed by NHS reforms. So in how far does NICE need to undergo a sea change? I'm asking. Again, these are not new arguments that I'm making. Many have been made before. Many of these have been made before, and each call to alter and adapt the approach to treatment guidelines has been ignored so far. So the paradigm for guideline development currently being adhered to has been shaped by medical science. Any guidelines for the treatment of mental health that includes the appraisal of a mixture of medical and psychological interventions ignores the crucial fact that psychological problems and treatments are much more complex and require a different approach. So the need to adapt. So there is a need for a sea change, and a paradigm is needed that firstly considers the historical and sociological forces that shape the reality it operates in, that takes the complexity of mental phenomena and psychological treatment seriously, that adapts the grade system. And for those who are not familiar, it uses the grade approach, which is a frequently used system to assess the quality of randomized controlled trials. So it allocates points or bias risk scores for criteria such as sample size, blinding, analytic approach, and the reporting quality of the study. However, by default, psychological treatments are always given lower points, leading to favoring medical trials over psychotherapy 1. So assessing the quality of psychological treatment trials in the same way as drug trials is epistemologically unsound. I mean, as an example, it is not possible to have double-blind randomized controlled trials for psychological treatments. And lastly, a paradigm is needed that gets rid of the arbitrary and unhelpful hierarchy of evidence and calls for science that combines data and findings from a range of research methodologies. And that also gets me to my next point, which is the sole focus on randomized controlled trials, which is a restricted model of science. As we all know, and I'm not calling against randomized controlled trials. I think they're very important, but they're an important part in the research cycle. But I believe they're inappropriately elevated above observational studies and creating an illusory hierarchy. So their hallmark really is not possible in trials of psychological therapies. So regardless of the review question, NICE should always draw on a diverse range of evidence to answer the review question. So any guideline really that ignores important evidence for psychological therapies as they occur in clinical practice, so in the UK within the NHS settings, is actually concerning. So randomized controlled trials seek to minimize variability, so assuming that all therapies are equally effective, is far removed from our routine practice. So this also includes the kind of patients who seek treatment or the kind to whom services should be reaching out. There is huge variability. So regardless of the particular review question, as I said, the NICE guideline should really endeavour to answer it by drawing on a diverse range of evidence. So this should include, as outlined earlier, case studies and qualitative research, as well as real-world data, which in the UK we have started to collect. And case studies and qualitative evidence should inform the existing guideline as part of a multi-level synthesis, and not just sort of as a side, as it was in the 2009 guideline. I mean, they reviewed some of the qualitative evidence, but they haven't actually taken it into account when they recommended treatments. So, as I said, creating sound public policy requires that we draw on a diverse range of evidence. So a good model is one that seeks to integrate scientific knowledge, clinical judgment, and expertise. And that's what I've just said, that it should really include all kinds of evidence as part of a multi-level synthesis. So the ambition, and that gets me to my final point really, the ambition of NICE to recommend as few treatments as possible, or in other words, to identify the most effective treatment for the depression or any other mental health condition, actually ignores our knowledge that a one-size-fits-all model in mental health is untenable. A range of treatments have been shown to be effective. So the ambition to identify the most effective treatment and provide a rank order of intervention restricts patients' choice and shared decision-making as much as it leads to the referrals of treatments that might actually not be helpful at all. It furthermore ignores important evidence that preference has on treatment outcome. We know, research has shown over and over again that actually if you get the treatment that you prefer, your outcome is much better. So acknowledging the fact that overall 50% of all patients benefit from psychological treatments and medication, I believe a society ought to offer them, our patients, these various treatments and not just one or two of them. So by overemphasizing the importance of evidence of treatment efficacy, so which assumes it is the particular treatment model that matters, we ignore many of the other significant variables that determine treatment outcome. For example, therapist effects, pre-treatment patient characteristics, the combination and the dynamic of both. So thus, our research endeavors ought to be directed towards a systematic examination of who benefits and who does not from which treatment and therapist, and at what particular point in their life, really, to help guide treatment recommendations better. And there's a review, I've put that in because I just recently found it, or just sort of reviewing this talk, I came across this very interesting study by Lazar, who actually has also shown, by looking at the range of evidence, so not just randomized controlled trial, that psychotherapy in general is not only clinically effective, but is actually also cost effective. And most interestingly was what they found is that actually shorter treatments is not more cost effective. The shorter the treatment gets is not more cost effective. And I found that quite interesting. So it is really pivotal that we remind organizations such as NICE that they ought to keep scientific equipoise and integrity. That means that before a novel measure, criteria, or technique can be used, it needs to undergo the usual rigorous validity and reliability tests carried out within the scientific community. So no organization should be exempt from such an approach. So if the guideline development group develops new methodologies, such as, as I've highlighted, as part of their work, these too need to be published in peer-reviewed journals and scrutinized by the research community before these can be applied to this important task at hand. Methods chosen need to be transparent, clearly outlined and justified. So in the case of utilizing a novel method, it needs to be stated as well as the limitations of it needs to be clearly explained. And I'm arguing, although they have changed that slightly, it's still not good enough in order to explain, the limitations of network meta-analysis, for example. And interestingly, actually, when I went through the various studies that used network meta-analysis and looked at their rationale for using it, so not related to NICE, but in general, sort of looking at network meta-analyses that have been carried out, and I looked for their rationale for using it instead of head-to-head trials. It was quite interesting because recently studies have chosen or justified their chosen methodology because NICE is advocating and utilizing them. So a method seems to have become established not because of scientific rigor, but because of an autocratic voice. And surely this is worrying when applied to a task that seeks to help those most in need. So one of the problems that we encountered with NICE in response to our concerns was during the second consultation was that they have sort of said, well, we're only doing our job and we're doing what is in the NICE method guideline. So in that sense, no further room for discussion or negotiation was provided. And what's part of the NICE guideline, or the NICE manual, the NICE manual, is that it states there should be a proper stakeholder involvement. However, in practice, it's not really a proper stakeholder involvement. And that too, stakeholders to actually really fulfill their role as quality assurance of a guideline needs to be more than just a tick box exercise. And this has become clear with this guideline very much. So again, the call for scientific rigor and integrity, stakeholders play an important role in that. And you know, we've sort of called that more stakeholder involvement is needed, that, for example, every guideline should have at least a second consultation period. So as it happened, that was last summer as well, the NICE guideline manual was also due to be updated last year. So stakeholders were invited to comment on the draft update over the summer last year. And luckily it wasn't as long as the depression guideline, so we reviewed that as well. And in a way we raised all the points that and others too, but most of the points that I've highlighted in this presentation, and urging them to incorporate them into their guideline manual, so that actually development groups that develop the guidelines for depression and other mental health conditions, you know, would be able to refer to it, or wouldn't be able to sort of say, well, we're just following our manual, we cannot make changes. And in that, we also urged NICE to review its process of stakeholder involvement by giving more time to review the guidelines. As I said, by making a second consultation common practice, and by allowing a dialogue, really, in order to allow stakeholders to fulfill their role to provide quality assurance and peer review. And again, it was interesting what NICE responded in writing. And they said, and I quote, "Changes to the process for consultation would lengthen the overall timeline for guidance development. NICE aims to ensure that development time enables robust development whilst recognizing the need to deliver value for money." So sadly, not much has changed in terms of the manual guiding future guidelines, so including the attempt for stakeholder involvement to become more than a simple tick box exercise. However, with regards to the depression guideline, we're not giving up so easily. We didn't campaign against the manual. We were rather busy with the campaign against the depression guideline. However, we won't give up so easily. We are a strong coalition, as I've said. We are over 37. We are 37 organisations who are supporting the position statement, who are supporting the campaign, and over, I've lost count, but I think there are over 40 individual signatories now. So we are a very strong coalition whose united voice cannot easily be ignored. And I think one of the strengths of this campaign is that it isn't one approach against the other, that it is really about the scientific integrity and the methodological flaws that underpin the recommendations. And I gave a brief sort of interview on Radio 3 here in England, and I sort of likened the problem to a house, and I sort of said, well, if the foundation of the house isn't correct, everything that will be built on top of it will be absolutely skewed and wonky and cannot be trusted. And this is exactly the same with this guideline. No matter what is recommended at the moment, given that the methodology is flawed, the recommendations that follow cannot be trusted. So, and as I said, we've had the meeting a couple of weeks ago with them, where we in detail, I think it was a 3-hour meeting, went through all our concerns, raised them with them, and we're really hoping that they will address them this time. So we're waiting to hear back. I haven't heard back yet, but that's where we're at with the campaign. So thank you very much for your attention. And we can open for questions, Alex?
Yes, thank you so much, Felicitas. That was wonderful. And so, as we said in the beginning, all attendees have the option to either click on the raising hand icon on the dashboard on your right, or you can write a question on the questions tab, and I'll read it out loud so that Felicitas can answer. So let's just give a brief moment. If people have any questions or comments or reflections, feel free to click on the raised hand icon or leave a question at the questions tab. So as of right now, we have no particular questions. Felicitas, I'm wondering if you would have any final reflection or comment that you'd like to add, just so we can see if someone else would like to jump in, just in case.
Yeah. I mean, it's rather strange to talk to my screen and sort of talk to visual people, because I don't know who's in the audience at all.
Actually,
I've got no names, so
we just got a comment by Eliane Sommerfeld saying that it was a wonderful presentation and a very important campaign, and thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Yes. I mean, if anyone is, anyone, it doesn't have to be a question. Maybe people have some comments they want to make, or thoughts about, how we can address the problems in the future.
So we have a hand raised icon. Let me open up a microphone to Miranda. Can you hear us, Miranda?
Yeah. Hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Yeah.
I wondered if it's a bit of a broad question, really, but whether there would be anything you felt that ordinary psychotherapists could be doing in the meantime, whom to speak to, how to in some way raise people's awareness of this, either in NHS positions or in other contexts, so that people are aware of it, or what you thought ordinary people could do in the meantime, if anything.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I guess there's a few things that you could do. I mean, one of the things is to kind of distribute the position statement and pass that on to people. I mean, it outlines in detail the concerns I've been raising. And the idea also behind this talk was to kind of put this online, so that's also free and available for everyone to listen to it, so that they can sort of inform themselves. They can contact me anytime as well if they have any questions. But I suppose it's sort of about spreading the word, really, and raising it on social media, emailing the position statements to colleagues, to friends, to students. Yeah, I think that's what you could do.
That's great, thank you.
Yeah. And I mean, if there are organizations, for example, that are not not a signatory yet, and people might think they would have an interest in signing up. I mean, and that too, to get me in contact with them, or so we can liaise with them, and maybe they would want to support the campaign.
Excellent, thank you.
Thank you, Miranda. And you have just another thank you from M. Fock, and he or she, I don't know if it's a he or she, says thank you for the great presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, are there any, is anything not quite clear? Are there sort of any questions that people left with, and I can explain it perhaps a bit better or easier?
So you have another comment here by Philip Butter, and he writes, sorry I joined a little late, so may have missed an answer already. Your concern regarding NICE and depression, are your concerns across the board with other diagnoses? Interesting presentation, thank you.
Yeah, I mean, yes, so it's a mixture. So, I mean, the concerns, the specific concerns I've raised are obviously obviously with regards to this particular guideline for depression in adults. However, some of the concerns, the more broader ones, for example, only to focus on randomized controlled trials and not on other evidence, to my mind, concerns all guidelines. Similarly, that I think that all guidelines should should include long-term follow-up data. And indeed, most guidelines do, it's just this one doesn't. But yeah, so some of the points are obviously, we're making them generally, and that sort of refers back to the title of my talk, that I think that guideline developments in general need a sort of, it's time for sea change. We need a revised methodology. And we need to be, in a way, we need to be moving away from the medical model or using a medical science in order to kind of guide our treatments for psychological treatments. Yeah, so, and I guess that is relevant for other guidelines as well.
Thank you, Felicitas. We don't have as of, oh, wait, sorry, we do have. Let me just open that up. By Danilo Mogia. It's interesting that in other countries, I'm in Spain now, there are critical voices against how things have been doing in the mental health field based on authority from a biomedical model and not following other kinds of evidence coming from the more psychosocial perspective. I think your points are also aligned with the PTM, which is the Power Threat Meaning Framework, from BPS, also in the UK. So it's more of a comment than a question.
Yeah, yeah. And it's really interesting. I haven't had a chance yet to review it in detail, but the American Psychological Association has just come out with a guideline for depression, with their own guideline for depression. So they have sort of parted from the psychiatric guideline, and it'd be very interesting to review that as well, and to look at that, how they've addressed some of these issues. But there's clearly a need, and I'm so pleased to see that, you know, in general, people are getting around to understanding the need to really adapt treatment guidelines for psychological treatments and mental health, and that we can't follow the biomedical model. Yeah.
So, as of right now I can say that we don't have any further questions. I'm wondering, Felicitas, if you'd like to make just a brief final statement as we're closing off.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much for listening and for joining this presentation. And yes, I mean, in response to one of the questions, if there's anything you would like to do or you would like to get involved, do let me know. The position statement is on the SPR website, so you can download it from there and you can distribute it and do so. Because I think most people are actually not, especially, I mean, the normal population, probably a lot less even, are actually aware of this and aware of these tremendous consequences. And on one hand, we're addressing, or we want them to address the methodological issues. But we want them to address them because they actually have grave consequences. I mean, you know, if they don't, you know, I'm not joking, but thousands and thousands of people will get the wrong treatment. You know, these recommendations cannot be trusted, and they will impede, you know, the best possible care, and they will also impede patient choice. And I think that's a change in our society, at least in the British society, you know, which is a good change, that we're stressing that people can have a choice of what treatment they want. But guidelines like this don't allow that. So there's a huge discrepancy. So yes, I think I can go on. I can go on and on. So I'll stop here. And thank you so much for listening. And do get in touch. My email is on the slide if you have any questions or if you would like to get involved in any way.
Thank you so much, Felicitas. And I want to remind everyone that this webinar has been recorded and will be up today or tomorrow at the SPR Vimeo page. And it's totally free of charge, so people can rewatch it whenever they want. You don't have to be an SPR member to watch it or to share it. So please do feel free to share it around. And again, thank you so much, Felicitas, for this presentation.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you very much.